The instructors called it hell. They laughed when she arrived with 3 pairs of underwear and a dream of building bridges. But by day 5, those same alien commanders were taking notes while she ran their drills. You see, Kayla wasn't there to survive their training. She was there to expose it. The docking bay's atmosphere hit like a physical blow, precisely engineered to provoke fight-or-flight responses across 17 different species. The lighting pulsed at frequencies known to induce headaches in unadapted physiologies, while the floor vibrated at a subaudible frequency that triggered anxiety reflexes in most mammalian systems. This wasn't intimidation, it was calibration. Kayla stepped into this controlled chaos surrounded by biomechanically enhanced recruits whose chrome-plated limbs and ocular implants marked them as products of advanced military augmentation programs. Their presence created the perfect control group for measuring human physiological limitations under extreme stress. Each recruit represented another variable in the Academy's ongoing study of interspecies combat. Readiness. Commander Borak's theatrical welcome to hell speech contained specific phonetic combinations designed to spike cortisol levels in 12 different neural architectures. The gravel in his voice wasn't natural. It was augmented to resonate at frequencies that triggered ancestral defense mechanisms. His words about suffering and failure weren't motivation. They were measurement parameters. The architecture itself served as the first examination. Corridors angled at precisely 7.4 degrees off true north disrupted standard spatial orientation protocols. Doorways varied in height and width according to no discernible pattern, forcing constant recalibration of movement predictions. Even the air composition shifted subtly between sections, testing respiratory adaptation speeds. You see, the 3 pairs of underwear in Kayla's minimal luggage weren't oversight. Earth Command's psychological profiles indicated that excessive baggage would trigger additional security screening and behavioral monitoring. The calculated minimalism allowed her to pass through initial processing as just another underprepared recruit rather than a strategic asset. The laughter that greeted her diplomatic bridge-building mission statement wasn't cruelty. Instructors stationed throughout the bay were tracking micro-expressions across species, establishing baseline stress responses to social humiliation. Each chuckle was timed, each smirk catalogued, each dismissive gesture measured for its psychological impact. Research into elite military training programs consistently shows that initial humiliation serves to break down cultural conditioning, allowing instructors to observe raw cognitive patterns before defensive mechanisms develop. The Academy wasn't trying to build character. It was trying to access unfiltered threat response capabilities. That naive-sounding bridge-building mission provided the perfect cover. Earth intelligence needed a plausible diplomatic pretext that would explain why they'd send an apparently unenhanced human to the galaxy's most brutal training facility. The more ridiculous it sounded, the more believable it became as a bureaucratic miscalculation. The humiliation protocol was never about assessing physical fitness. It was designed to identify which recruits would look past their own discomfort to notice the systems creating that discomfort, who would count the surveillance drones instead of cowering from them, who would map the ventilation patterns instead of complaining about the stifling air. And then the real testing began. The physical assessment arena looked like pure competition, recruits training against impossible benchmarks while instructors recorded their failures. But every test concealed embedded observational priorities disguised as performance metrics. That 20-meter sprint wasn't about raw speed. It measured which candidates glanced at the structural supports during maximum exertion, noting the anti-grav stabilizers humming beneath the track surface, while others bench-pressed armored vehicles with augmented strength. Kayla hung from the pull-up bar like what one instructor termed a sad, sweaty flag. Her apparent struggle provided perfect cover for scanning ceiling-mounted sensor arrays tracking biometric data. Each failed repetition gave her another angle to map, monitoring equipment placements and blind spots in the coverage patterns. The pull-up bars' specialized alloy composition mattered far more than repetition counts. Its vibrational frequency intentionally interfered with nearby monitoring equipment, creating periodic gaps in surveillance coverage. Recruits focused on counting their lifts missed the crucial detail. The bar itself was designed to betray the Academy's observation systems at precise intervals. You see, the instructor's leering and mockery wasn't sadism. Each dismissive comment and condescending chuckle served as calibrated provocation testing emotional control under manufactured contempt. They needed to see who would break character when subjected to systematic humiliation, who would reveal their actual capabilities when pushed beyond pride. Comparative performance metrics across species created the perfect noise layer, while instructors appeared fascinated by the chrome-plated recruit, lifting 3 times his body weight, or the crystalline being demonstrating perfect marksmanship. Their real attention tracked who noticed the testing parameters themselves, who questioned why the obstacle course layout changed between attempts, or why the gravity settings fluctuated during precision tests. Earth's military research shows humans develop exceptional pattern recognition under physical distress, an evolutionary adaptation from being the physically vulnerable species on a dangerous planet. When the body approaches its limits, the brain seeks systemic understanding as survival mechanism. This biological trait became tactical advantage in environments designed to overwhelm. Kayla's quiet repetition of "I'm fine" during each failed test wasn't denial, it was operational discipline, maintaining her cover as an outmatched diplomatic attaché while mentally cataloging environmental variables. She noted which instructors monitored which systems, which consoles received live data feeds, and how response teams positioned themselves during simulated emergencies. The resolution became clear to those watching carefully. The instructors weren't evaluating strength or speed. They were identifying which recruits watched them back, which candidates tracked instructor movements instead of fixating on their own performance, who noticed when assessment criteria shifted without explanation, or when monitoring equipment received silent calibration adjustments. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Nightfall in the barracks revealed the Academy's true examination parameters. While recruits compared muscle soreness and enhancement specs, the walls themselves conducted surveillance through precisely tuned acoustic properties, certain frequencies amplified while others dampened, creating invisible channels where conversations carried further than they should, or not at all, depending on what the instructors wanted to overhear. Kayla ignored the boasting about neural implants and reinforced skeletons. Instead, she traced ventilation flows with her fingertips, noting which grills emitted the faintest hum of active airflow. The vents weren't for climate control. They were information conduits, some carrying sound efficiently to hidden receivers, others designed to muffle specific frequencies entirely. Her apparent distraction with basic tasks provided ideal cover for this environmental mapping. The whispered claims of technological superiority circulating through the bunk area weren't organic chatter. Instructors had planted specific boasts about shield capacities and weapon capabilities to gauge which recruits prioritized threat assessment over personal grievances. Those who discussed countermeasures instead of complaining about accommodations unknowingly passed this phase of evaluation. You see, those 3 pairs of underwear became tactical advantage after all. While others spent hygiene cycles managing extensive wardrobe maintenance, Kayla used the time to document maintenance bot patrol routes. She noted which cleaning units visited which stations at what intervals, and more importantly, which areas they consistently avoided. The patterns revealed unauthorized access routes and surveillance blind spots. Research into sleep-deprived cognition shows subjects reveal their true observational priorities through what they choose to document versus ignore. Exhausted minds focus on perceived survival necessities, bypassing trained responses to access deeper threat assessment instincts. The Academy was measuring which environmental details recruits considered worth remembering under fatigue. Her struggles with basic barracks routines, fumbling with unfamiliar cleaning systems, misunderstanding laundry protocols, provided perfect behavioral camouflage. While instructors expected humans to fail at galactic domestic technology, they didn't anticipate she'd be cataloging the failure patterns of the equipment itself, which sanitizer stations required maintenance most frequently, which lighting panels flickered at specific times, which door mechanisms showed signs of recent modification. The instructor's growing interest in her movements wasn't suspicion. It was dawning recognition of pattern-matching methodologies their training manuals hadn't anticipated. Where they expected cultural disorientation, they found systematic observation. Where they anticipated frustration with alien technology, they discovered reverse engineering of operational principles. The nighttime conversations weren't gossip. They were calibrated information leaks testing which recruits could distinguish strategic data from background noise, who would recognize the significance of a casually mentioned power grid, maintenance schedule versus who would only remember which. Recruits snored loudest, and then the environment itself began cooperating. The zero-gravity chamber wasn't about mastering weightlessness. It was a carefully orchestrated disorientation designed to see who could detect patterns within chaos. Gravity fields shifted without warning between terrestrial standard, lunar partial, and complete weightlessness, creating an environment where most recruits focus solely on not vomiting or colliding with walls. The real test measured who noticed the subtle regularities in these seemingly random fluctuations. Advanced weapons training served as elaborate camouflage for the actual evaluation. While instructors appeared focused on firing accuracy and tactical positioning, they were actually monitoring which recruits asked about energy sources rather than weapon specifications. The dazzling plasma rifles and sonic disruptors were props. In a much subtler examination of threat assessment, priorities. While crystal-skinned, recruits demonstrated spectacular marksmanship, their mineral composite bodies allowing perfect stability even in shifting gravity. Kayla tracked the power conduits feeding the holographic projectors. Her attention followed the thick cabling along the ceiling rather than the glowing targets. Each shot fired by other recruits created measurable power drain fluctuations that revealed the simulation's underlying infrastructure. The sudden earthquake simulation that shuddered through the training arena wasn't about testing stability under physical disturbance. It measured which recruits immediately checked structural integrity points versus those who assumed it was merely theatrical special effects. The instructors watched who looked at the ceiling supports during the shaking, who monitored emergency lighting activation sequences, who noted which safety systems engaged first. You see, her question about defensive barrier power sources wasn't academic curiosity. It was professional assessment of critical infrastructure vulnerabilities. While others discussed shield strength and recharge rates, she calculated how long the Academy's defenses would last if primary power failed, which systems had redundant backups, and where the single points of failure existed in their protective systems. Galactic defense doctrine operates on assumptions of technological superiority, designing systems to overwhelm opposition through advanced capability. Human tactical philosophy developed differently, prioritizing identification of systemic vulnerabilities and single points of failure. This approach emerged from centuries of confronting better-equipped adversaries through infrastructure targeting rather than direct confrontation. Those seemingly dry, environmental appendix references in the orientation materials weren't academic filler. They were intentional breadcrumbs left by facility designers testing for systemic thinkers. The data on local mineral deposits, atmospheric composition variations, and geothermal activity patterns contained clues about the Academy's infrastructure dependencies and potential weaknesses. Weapons proficiency mattered, significantly less than noticing which systems shared grid connections with life support. A recruit who observed that the same power conduits feeding the weapons simulator also supplied oxygen generation revealed more strategic thinking than one who could hit every target. The ability to trace system interdependencies indicated deeper tactical understanding than mere combat skill. The impressive display of alien marksmanship wasn't the evaluation. It served as distraction from the actual test occurring in the peripheral systems, the monitoring of which environmental details recruits noticed while their peers demonstrated physical prowess. The flashing lights and dramatic explosions provided cover for observing observational priorities, but the real curiosity began with flora. The Academy's lush vegetation wasn't there for atmosphere. Those carefully arranged ferns and flowering vines served as biosensors, monitoring physiological responses to stress stimuli across 17 species. Their leaves contained microscopic receptors that tracked pulse rates, cortisol emissions, and neural activity patterns through airborne chemical signatures. The garden sections weren't decorative. They were diagnostic arrays disguised as landscaping. While other recruits memorized weapon specifications and tactical protocols, Kayla mapped plant distribution patterns. She noted how dense clusters of silver-leafed shrubs consistently surrounded surveillance nodes, their broad leaves perfectly positioned to conceal sensor clusters. The winding pathways through botanical sections weren't for leisurely walks. They were observation routes allowing instructors to monitor reactions to specific floral arrangements known to trigger species-specific responses. Her apparent interest in horticulture concealed systematic mapping of wireless network nodes. The elaborate floral arrangements contained carefully concealed transmitters disguised as natural growths. Certain flowers with particularly vibrant blossoms housed signal boosters, while twisting vines served as organic antenna arrays. She documented which plant species appeared near communication hubs and which were positioned near living quarters. The Academy's ecology wasn't environmental design, it functioned as the facility's nervous system. Specific genetically modified species emitted controlled frequencies that disrupted unauthorized recording equipment, creating protected zones where sensitive conversations could occur. Other plants absorbed particular sound frequencies, providing acoustic masking for strategic discussions. The entire botanical scheme represented an organic security infrastructure. You see, Earth intelligence long suspected galactic defense programs used biologically engineered plant life as information infrastructure. Botanical systems offered self-repairing, energy-independent networks that were difficult to detect using standard scanning protocols. Kayla's mission included verifying these suspicions through direct observation of how vegetation integrated with security systems. Research into advanced bioengineering confirms certain plant species can be modified to function as passive recording devices through piezoelectric effects in their cellular structures. Others serve as signal dampeners using specialized leaf structures that absorb specific electromagnetic frequencies. The Academy's gardens represented cutting-edge integration of organic and technological surveillance systems. Her seemingly sentimental plant sketches and notes about flowering patterns weren't botanical interest. She was documenting coverage gaps based on variations in photosynthetic activity. Areas with less vigorous growth often indicated energy drains from concealed equipment, while unusually healthy sections suggested supplemental power sources feeding hidden systems. The patterns revealed the facility's operational infrastructure. The instructors initially misinterpreted her plant observations as human sentimentality or cultural fascination with alien flora. They assumed she found comfort in familiar-seeming biological processes amid overwhelming technological environments. This misapprehension provided perfect cover for her tactical analysis of their bioengineered security systems. The resolution became increasingly clear with each documented correlation between plant placement and security functions. The twisting crimson vines near command centers weren't decorative. Their spiral patterns matched the frequency of encrypted data transmissions. The towering crystal bark trees surrounding barracks weren't providing shade. Their crystalline structures were resonating with containment field generators. The flora wasn't scenery. It was the Academy's self-maintaining, self-concealing data transmission network, using organic processes to power and conceal communication systems that would be easily detectable if implemented through conventional technology. The perfect camouflage was being literally naturalized into the environment. And then the records raised questions. A military service record as pristine as Kayla's didn't just suggest competence, it signaled professional sanitization. While other recruits' files showed the expected mix of commendations and minor infractions, hers read like diplomatic fiction. The complete absence of operational blemishes, the perfectly spaced promotions, the suspiciously uniform performance evaluations, these weren't signs of perfection. They were the trademark of intelligence agencies creating cover, identities that could withstand superficial scrutiny while signaling deeper layers to trained observers. The clerical error explanation floated by Earth Command served as deliberate bait. It presented instructors with an almost plausible excuse for the record's unusual cleanliness, testing whether they would accept convenient administrative explanations or dig deeper. This calculated ambiguity created the perfect conditions for observing the Academy's analytical protocols in action. The theory's very plausibility measured institutional complacency versus investigative rigor. Commander Borak's team found themselves debating two competing theories. Either the record showed sophisticated redaction patterns, indicating high-level clearance, or it demonstrated bureaucratic incompetence creating accidentally perfect documentation. Both interpretations served Earth intelligence's objectives beautifully. The uncertainty itself became a diagnostic tool, revealing how the Academy's security apparatus handled ambiguous threats and conflicting narratives. The missing data points weren't omissions. Specific gaps in training records, absent deployment histories, and missing equipment certification dates functioned as deliberate markers indicating clearance levels beyond standard military classification. These voids communicated more to trained analysts than any listed achievement could have. Each absence signaled operations too sensitive for documentation, technologies too advanced for standard tracking, or missions existing outside formal command structures. You see, a logistics specialist wouldn't naturally notice secondary power grid vulnerabilities during weapons training, but an infrastructure sabotage expert certainly would. The pattern of her observations, consistently focusing on structural weaknesses, energy dependencies, and system interdependencies, created statistical improbability that eventually registered on the instructor's threat assessment algorithms. Her accidental discoveries followed professional patterns rather than random chance. Galactic intelligence protocols assume forged records contain detectable inconsistencies, slight chronological errors, incompatible skill sets, or psychological profiles that don't align with documented behavior. A perfectly consistent record suggests not authenticity but superior forgery capabilities. The Academy's systems were designed to flag imperfections, making flawless documentation potentially more suspicious than problematic records. Her apparent incompetence became mathematically unsustainable. The frequency with which she stumbled upon critical systems, accidentally observed security protocols, and naively questioned infrastructure design exceeded random probability by orders of magnitude. The pattern suggested either divine intervention or professional training, and the Academy's systems weren't configured to account for celestial interference. The instructor's dawning realization wasn't discovery. It represented the exact response Earth Command had anticipated and manipulated through careful calibration of her record and behavior. Their moment of revelation wasn't operational failure but mission success. The Academy's security systems had finally detected what they were supposed to detect, exactly when they were supposed to detect it. The clean record wasn't error. It functioned as calibrated signal to those trained to recognize intentional emptiness. Like negative space in artwork, the missing information created shapes more meaningful than any listed qualification. The voids indicated operations that couldn't be documented, skills that couldn't be officially recognized, and clearances that didn't appear on standard charts, but the maze would confirm everything. The combat maze presented itself as a straightforward survival exercise, but the drones hunting recruits weren't obstacles. They functioned as mobile diagnostics measuring algorithmic prediction capabilities across species. Their patrol patterns weren't random. They responded to movement with complex adaptive behaviors designed to reveal how different neural architectures anticipated threat movements. Each evasive maneuver provided data points about cognitive processing under fire. While the shifting walls tested spatial memory and adaptation speed, the ventilation systems served as the real examination. Their airflow patterns created acoustic channels and thermal signatures that could be exploited for navigation or concealment. Recruits focused on not getting shot missed the environmental opportunities, the subtle air currents that could carry scent away from tracking systems, the grills that could be manipulated to create distractions, the thermal drafts that confused infrared targeting. Kayla ignored the prescribed paths entirely. Instead of running the gauntlet, she examined maintenance patches on the walls, noting where repairs had been made most frequently. These recurring weak points indicated structural vulnerabilities or system failures, places where the simulation might be glitchy or where hardware might be accessible. Each repaired section told a story about what broke under stress and how the Academy maintained its illusion of seamless operation. The warning that pain would be real wasn't ethical consideration. It served as pressure testing for risk assessment under physical threat. The statement measured who would take unnecessary risks versus who would calculate acceptable losses. Some recruits heard warning, others heard challenge. But the instructors listened for who asked about medical response times and emergency shutdown protocols. You see, mapping drone patrol algorithms required ignoring the drones themselves to focus on their creation parameters. The patterns revealed programming priorities, which movements triggered aggressive responses, which areas received heaviest coverage, how response times varied based on threat level assessment. The machine's behavior indicated their designers' assumptions about tactical thinking. Research into unconventional problem-solving shows exceptional performers analyze system generation rules rather than system outputs. They don't play the game better. They understand why the game exists in its current form. This metacognitive approach allows identifying leverage points invisible to those focused on winning within established parameters. Her apparent cheating, bypassing entire sections through maintenance access, wasn't rule violation. It demonstrated superior understanding of the simulation's operating principles. She recognized that safety regulations would require manual shutdown options, that maintenance access would exist for repairs, and that these systems would inevitably create vulnerabilities in the perfect combat simulation. The environmental variances others dismissed as bugs were actually designed loopholes. Slightly inconsistent gravity in certain sectors, timing delays between wall movements, thermal signatures that didn't match ambient temperature, these weren't errors. They tested which recruits would exploit system imperfections versus those who would treat the simulation as inviolable reality. The maze wasn't about navigation. It measured who realized they were inside a diagnostic instrument rather than a test. The difference was crucial. One required playing by established rules. The other involved understanding why those rules existed and how they could be reconfigured. The recruits who finished fastest often scored lowest on strategic assessment, while those who spent time understanding the mechanism scored highest. And then the invitation arrived. That maintenance access panel wasn't an oversight. Service panels throughout the facility served as intentional accessibility points for system administrators performing diagnostics and repairs. Their standardized placement followed galactic safety regulations that mandated manual override capabilities within specific distance parameters of automated systems. The Academy's design included these access points not as vulnerabilities, but as necessary features for operational maintenance. When Kayla disabled the central coordination drone, she wasn't violating protocols. She was demonstrating understanding of administrative hierarchy within automated systems. The central unit controlled subordinate drones but answered to higher-level command protocols that could be accessed through maintenance interfaces. Her actions showed comprehension of the chain of command governing the simulation's artificial intelligence systems. Instructors watched silently through monitoring systems as she accessed control interfaces never mentioned during orientation. Her navigation of diagnostic menus and system status displays proved she'd mapped the behind-the-scenes infrastructure supporting the combat simulation. The ease with which she located performance metrics and system interdependency charts indicated prior familiarity with similar security architectures. The immediate grid shift compensation response wasn't correction of her actions. It represented acknowledgement that she'd triggered higher-level response protocols normally reserved for system administrators. The automatic recalibration of drone patrol patterns and security coverage indicated the simulation recognized her access as authorized rather than intrusive. The system responded to her commands as legitimate instructions rather than threats. You see, those environmental appendix references others dismissed as irrelevant technical data weren't ancillary information. They contained the encryption key for understanding system interdependencies, power grid load distributions, maintenance schedule patterns, and safety regulation compliance documentation that revealed how the facility's systems interconnected. The dry technical specifications mapped the Academy's operational nervous system. Galactic defense doctrine typically assumes threats originate from external sources approaching through conventional attack vectors. Human security philosophy developed differently, anticipating inside access through maintenance and sanitation systems that often receive less security scrutiny. This perspective emerged from centuries of dealing with infiltration through utility systems and service access points. Her tools weren't smuggled contraband. She improvised them from standardized Academy equipment, meal tray implements reconfigured as interface tools, cleaning supplies repurposed as diagnostic aids, and training materials modified for technical access. This demonstrated resourcefulness within constraints rather than violation of equipment protocols. The drone patrol mapping she conducted earlier wasn't about avoidance tactics. It served as data collection for predictive modeling of automated security system responses. By documenting pattern variations under different conditions, she built behavioral models that allowed anticipating system reactions to unconventional inputs. This predictive capability enabled her navigation of administrative interfaces, The disablement of the central drone wasn't victory over the simulation. It functioned as audition, demonstration of capabilities the Academy's design intended to identify. The action showed she understood the system's operational principles well enough to manipulate its command structure rather than merely survive its challenges, but the conference room would change everything. Conference room. Alpha wasn't a tribunal despite the imposing holographic display and the stern-faced commanders. This sterile chamber with its precisely calibrated acoustics and neutral temperature control served as final validation testing for operational readiness. The commanders' severe expressions concealed professional anticipation. They'd potentially identified what the Academy's entire structure was designed to find. Their rigid postures and unblinking attention measured her response to confrontational authority rather than conveying actual displeasure. Kayla's casual estimate of about 3 days until detection wasn't admission of deception. It represented performance metrics reporting based on observed assessment capabilities. The precision of her timeline, not 2 days, not 4, demonstrated exact understanding of their detection protocols and response thresholds. She wasn't guessing how long she could evade notice but reporting how long their systems required to identify patterns. She'd intentionally revealed. The shock that rippled through the command team wasn't about being fooled. It reflected professional astonishment at the precision of her assessment of their assessment capabilities. Her timeline matched almost exactly when their anomaly detection algorithms had finally flagged her behavior patterns as statistically significant rather than random variants. She hadn't just predicted their discovery, she'd reverse-engineered their evaluation parameters and scoring rubrics. You see, pretending to wash out required meticulous understanding of washout criteria. She needed to know exactly which failures would trigger dismissal versus which would be tolerated as normal rookie performance. This meant she'd decoded their entire evaluation framework, the weighted scoring of physical versus observational performance, the threshold for intervention, and the precise combination of indicators that would signal intentional underperformance rather than genuine inability. Intelligence assessment facilities routinely test their own detection systems using calibrated threats. These controlled challenges measure whether security protocols can identify sophisticated infiltration attempts. Kayla served as both threat and calibration, a precisely measured challenge testing whether their systems could detect someone who understood their detection methodologies better than they did. Her surveillance activities, since day 2, weren't espionage against the Academy. They constituted quality assurance testing of their observational infrastructure. By noting which systems detected her activities and which failed to register anomalies, she provided real-world stress testing of their security apparatus. Each unnoticed environmental mapping operation revealed gaps in coverage, while each detected action confirmed system functionality. The extended silence that followed her explanation wasn't anger or embarrassment. It represented professional admiration for flawless execution of embedded assessment. The commanders recognized she hadn't beaten their system. She'd completed its intended function by demonstrating the exact capabilities it was designed to identify. Their silence measured the gap between their operational assumptions and her demonstrated capabilities. The confession wasn't admission of wrongdoing. It functioned as job application, demonstrating qualifications they hadn't known they needed. Her detailed explanation of their security vulnerabilities and observational blind spots presented both diagnosis and proposed treatment. She wasn't just identifying problems but offering solutions, based on superior understanding of threat assessment methodologies. And then the negotiation began. The Galactic Defense Academy's military front concealed its real product, not warriors but threat assessment methodologies refined through interspecies psychological profiling. Beneath the grueling physical trials and simulated combat scenarios lay a sophisticated apparatus measuring cognitive responses across 17 neural architectures. The brutality wasn't training. It was data collection disguised as character building. Kayla's revelation about the Academy's intelligence assessment function wasn't accidental discovery. It represented successful completion of their ultimate evaluation. By identifying the facility's true purpose on day 2, she demonstrated the exact pattern recognition capabilities their system was designed to identify. Her confession wasn't exposure. It was final examination passed with maximum score. The terminology about fronts and covers wasn't accusation. It served as professional recognition of their own operational security effectiveness. When she described their warrior training as elaborate camouflage, the commanders recognized she'd understood their system better than some instructors did. This wasn't failure of their security. It was validation of its ability to identify superior analytical capabilities. You see, forging elite warriors requires identifying those who can deconstruct the forging process itself. The Academy needed recruits who wouldn't just follow protocols, but would understand why those protocols existed in their current form. This metacognitive approach allowed identifying individuals who could improve the system rather than merely operate within it. Research into advanced security systems shows the most effective designs contain built-in vulnerability detection mechanisms that mirror external threat capabilities. The Academy wasn't just training defenders. It was cultivating internal critics who could stress test their methodologies using the same analytical approaches potential adversaries might employ. This self-assessment capability represented strategic evolution beyond conventional defense paradigms. Her offer to redesign their training protocols wasn't arrogance. It provided the exact unconventional thinking their system was designed to recruit. Where Galactic Defense prioritized technological superiority and standardized protocols, she introduced human tactical thinking based on environmental manipulation and vulnerability exploitation. This complementary approach addressed blind spots in their existing assessment methodologies. The resulting alliance wasn't compromise between conflicting philosophies. It created symbiotic integration of complementary threat assessment approaches. Galactic doctrine brought advanced technology and interspecies cognitive modeling, while human methodology contributed adaptive environmental exploitation and infrastructure targeting strategies. Together they formed more comprehensive security framework. The resolution transformed the Academy's fundamental purpose. It ceased being merely training facility and became the thing it sought to understand, a living laboratory for threat assessment evolution. Rather than producing warriors who could face known threats, it now cultivated analysts who could anticipate unknown vulnerabilities. But the real transformation was yet to come. Tactical thinking operates at the metacognitive level. It's about understanding how methods are generated rather than simply executing established procedures. The knowledge exchange between Kayla and the commanders wasn't information transfer in the conventional sense. It functioned as comparative analysis of decision-making architectures, examining the underlying assumptions and processes that shaped both galactic and human approaches to threat assessment. This wasn't teaching. It was mutual dissection of strategic philosophies. The tension emerged from fundamentally different starting assumptions. Galactic doctrine operated from positions of technological superiority, designing systems to overwhelm opposition through advanced capability. Human doctrine developed from assumptions of systemic vulnerability, prioritizing identification of single points of failure and environmental manipulation. These contrasting approaches created friction that revealed gaps in both systems' perceptual ranges. The proposal to recruit humans instead of testing them wasn't negotiation. It represented operationalization of their discovery about human cognitive advantages in pattern recognition and environmental analysis. This shift acknowledged that some capabilities only manifest in authentic operational contexts, rather than controlled testing environments. The Academy was incorporating a previously excluded observational methodology. You see, understanding how galactic defense worked required examining its generative principles rather than its specific implementations. Kayla's approach focused on why systems were designed certain ways, what assumptions guided their development, and how they might fail under unconventional pressure. This metacognitive perspective allowed identifying vulnerabilities, invisible to those focused on operational performance. Research into cross-doctrinal exchange demonstrates innovation emerges not through adoption of foreign methods, but through contrast-induced insight. The juxtaposition of galactic technological emphasis with human environmental manipulation strategies created cognitive friction that revealed previously invisible assumptions and limitations in both approaches. This contrast produced new understanding rather than simple combination of existing methodologies. Her role transformed from student to diagnostic instrument, revealing gaps in the Academy's understanding of threat response. She wasn't teaching human tactics but demonstrating alternative cognitive patterns that could be applied to existing systems. This external perspective highlighted unexamined assumptions in their security protocols and assessment criteria that had developed through institutional inertia. The comprehensive view that emerged wasn't concession or surrender. It represented acquisition of human perspective on their own, systems' unexamined assumptions, the cultural blind spots and technological dependencies that had developed through generations of operating from positions of superiority. This expanded perceptual range strengthened rather than weakened their defensive capabilities. The sharing of methodologies and perspectives wasn't vulnerability. It constituted strategic strength through expanded perceptual range and cognitive diversity. By incorporating human approaches to environmental analysis and vulnerability identification, the Academy developed more robust threat assessment capabilities that could anticipate challenges beyond conventional attack vectors. The resolution transformed the fundamental nature of their collaboration. This wasn't information exchange but integration of complementary cognitive methodologies that together created more comprehensive security framework. The combination of galactic technological sophistication with human adaptive thinking produced capabilities greater than either approach could achieve separately. And then the pedagogy transformed. Elite warriors distinguished themselves not through protocol compliance but through understanding when those protocols require rewriting. The transformed dynamic at the Academy didn't signal human superiority so much as operational integration of multiple perceptual frameworks functioning simultaneously. Where galactic training previously emphasized standardized responses to known threats, the new approach incorporated complementary observational methodologies that expanded threat assessment, capabilities beyond conventional parameters. Alien commanders taking notes during Kayla's demonstrations didn't represent submission to human methods. It reflected professional development in previously unavailable cognitive methodologies, specifically human approaches to environmental analysis and vulnerability identification. Their careful documentation indicated recognition that effective security requires diverse perceptual frameworks operating in concert rather than singular doctrinal approaches. The symbiotic training program wasn't compromised between conflicting philosophies. It operationalized the Academy's true purpose as intelligence assessment nexus, a living laboratory for threat evaluation methodologies rather than mere warrior production facility. This shift acknowledged that comprehensive security requires continuous self-assessment through external perspectives that can identify blind spots in established systems. You see, unconventional thinking becomes standard operational procedure when institutions recognize that convention often represents unexamined repetition of previously effective patterns. The Academy's evolution demonstrated that protocols developed during earlier conflict scenarios might not address emerging threats requiring adaptive rather than repetitive responses. This realization transformed their approach to training and threat assessment. Research into cognitive diversity shows problem-solving enhances not through agreement, but through constructive contradiction. The integration of human tactical thinking, with its emphasis on environmental manipulation and infrastructure targeting, created productive friction with galactic technological superiority approaches. This contrast revealed assumptions and limitations invisible within singular doctrinal frameworks. Her teaching sessions weren't conventional instruction. They functioned as live demonstrations of alternative cognitive patterns applied to existing systems. Rather than lecturing about human tactics, she showed how environmental analysis and vulnerability identification methodologies could be integrated with advanced technology to create more comprehensive security protocols. The orientation curriculum rewrite wasn't mere revision of existing materials. It represented incorporation of previously excluded observational priorities, specifically attention to infrastructure interdependencies, environmental variables, and systemic vulnerabilities. These elements had been considered secondary to combat skills in traditional galactic defense training but proved essential for comprehensive threat assessment. The new standard didn't replace existing protocols. It expanded what elite meant beyond physical capability and technological proficiency to include cognitive flexibility and systemic analysis. This broader definition acknowledged that effective security requires understanding not just how to operate systems, but why they're designed certain ways and how they might fail under unconventional pressure. The resolution transformed the Academy's fundamental identity. It ceased being merely a training facility and became an evolving security organism that incorporated continuous self-assessment through external perspectives. This metamorphosis required acknowledging that the most effective defense systems contain mechanisms for identifying their own limitations through contrast with alternative methodologies. But the final transformation redefined everything about how galactic security institutions approached threat assessment and personnel development. The integration of previously excluded cognitive frameworks created capabilities that exceeded what either approach could achieve separately, demonstrating that security strengthens through perceptual diversity rather than doctrinal purity. Surviving that first day wasn't about endurance or toughness. It was about recognizing that the theatrical suffering and manufactured humiliation served specific diagnostic purposes hidden beneath their brutal surface. The dehydration protocols, the disorienting lighting, the calculated social isolation. These weren't tests of physical limits, but calibrated measurements of cognitive responses to systematic pressure. Those who focused solely on enduring missed the actual examination occurring in their peripheral awareness. Becoming their instructor wasn't promotion or unexpected career advancement. It represented fulfillment of the Academy's core design purpose, identifying individuals who could understand its mechanisms well enough to improve them. The facility wasn't built to produce soldiers, but to find those who could see through its theatrical facade to the assessment architecture underneath. Her transition from recruit to teacher wasn't anomaly but intended outcome. The apparent paradox of a recruit teaching instructors wasn't contradiction. It demonstrated the Academy's recognition that effective security requires understanding its own limitations through external perspective. The institution needed someone who approached its systems not as user, but as analyst, examining operational assumptions rather than simply following established protocols. This external viewpoint revealed blind spots invisible to those immersed in the system's daily operations. The most dangerous threat to any security system isn't external opposition. It's those who understand your systems better than you do, and use that understanding to improve them. This perspective transforms potential adversaries into invaluable assets, provided the institution possesses the humility to recognize the value of external critique. The Academy's willingness to learn from its own evaluation subject represented strategic evolution beyond conventional defense paradigms. You see, tactical creativity doesn't stem from randomness or unpredictability. It emerges from understanding predictability so thoroughly that you can manipulate its parameters. This requires comprehending not just how systems function, but why they function in specific ways, the assumptions and constraints that shape their design and operation. This metacognitive approach allows identifying leverage points invisible to those focused on operational performance. Research into security consulting consistently shows the most effective practitioners are those who initially approach systems as adversaries before transitioning to architects. This adversarial perspective allows identifying vulnerabilities and failure modes that designers immersed in creation processes often overlook. The ability to switch between breaking and building represents invaluable capability in security evolution. Her influence throughout the Academy wasn't hostile takeover or subversion. It completed the institution's evolutionary trajectory toward integrated threat assessment by incorporating previously excluded observational methodologies. Where galactic defense prioritized technological superiority, she introduced human approaches focusing on environmental manipulation and vulnerability identification. This integration created more comprehensive security framework. The philosophical discussions about adaptability that emerged weren't abstract speculation. They became operational doctrine for galactic-scale security challenges, requiring perpetual evolution rather than fixed protocols. This recognized that effective defense demands continuous adaptation to emerging threats rather than reliance on established methods that might become obsolete against novel challenges. The resolution transformed the teacher from conqueror to catalyst. She became the system achieving self-awareness through external perspective, recognizing its own limitations and incorporating methodologies to address them. This metamorphosis required the institution to acknowledge that security strengthens through perceptual diversity rather than doctrinal purity. And then, the recruits arrived. 6 weeks later, a human instructor stood where Commander Borak had once delivered his theatrical welcome speech. This wasn't an anomaly or temporary experiment. It represented validation of the Academy's successful adaptation to incorporating unconventional cognitive methodologies. The orientation process now began with environmental analysis drills before any physical training, reversing the traditional galactic approach that prioritized strength over observation. Alien commanders observed from the sidelines with datapads in hand, but this wasn't supervisory oversight. Their note-taking documented continuous learning from operationalized unconventional thinking, recording how human approaches to threat assessment could be integrated with existing protocols. They studied the new recruits' reactions to training that emphasized perceptual orientation before combat readiness, measuring how different species adapted to this reversed priority structure. The complete flip in frontline evaluation criteria wasn't mere policy change. It acknowledged that the actual frontline begins with perceptual orientation, the ability to recognize environmental patterns and systemic vulnerabilities before engaging physical threats. This shift recognized that identifying threats required different skills than defeating them, and that conventional training had been addressing the second phase while neglecting the first. The resulting symbiotic program functioned as mature implementation of cross-species cognitive collaboration, rather than experimental initiative. Where previous training had forced all recruits into standardized galactic protocols, the new approach incorporated species-specific observational strengths into collective threat assessment methodologies. This created more comprehensive security framework that leveraged diverse perceptual capabilities. You see, recruiting humans instead of merely testing them acknowledged that certain capabilities only manifest in authentic operational contexts. The adaptive thinking and environmental manipulation skills that defined human tactical approaches couldn't be properly measured in controlled testing environments. They required real-world application where unexpected variables and improvisation opportunities revealed true capabilities. The Academy had finally recognized that evaluation needed to occur through performance rather than examination. Research into military training methodologies consistently shows symbiotic programs outperform standardized curricula through continuous mutual adaptation. The interaction between different tactical philosophies creates cognitive friction that reveals assumptions and limitations in all approaches, leading to more robust and flexible security protocols. This evolutionary process strengthens defensive capabilities beyond what any single methodology can achieve. Her role as instructor was an exception to galactic norms. It served as prototype for integrated defense intelligence methodology that prioritized cognitive diversity over doctrinal purity. This approach recognized that comprehensive security requires multiple perceptual frameworks operating simultaneously rather than singular standardized approaches. The human perspective became integral rather than anomalous. The transformation's resolution didn't represent conclusion or final outcome. It marked new beginning with expanded cognitive parameters that incorporated previously excluded observational methodologies. This evolutionary step acknowledged that security institutions must continuously adapt their approaches to address emerging threats that might exploit limitations in established protocols. The implications of this metamorphosis extended far beyond the Academy's training facilities, suggesting broader shifts in how galactic security institutions approached threat assessment and personnel development. The integration of human tactical thinking with its emphasis on environmental manipulation and vulnerability identification demonstrated that security strengthens through perceptual diversity rather than doctrinal standardization. But the story's resolution underscored that this evolution represented ongoing process rather than final achievement. The Academy had become living laboratory for security methodology development, continuously testing and refining its approaches through incorporation of external perspectives. This transformation acknowledged that effective defense requires perpetual adaptation rather than fixed protocols. Human adaptability isn't biological superiority, but developed cognitive methodology. A species lacking natural weapons or armor learns to prioritize environmental manipulation over direct confrontation. This approach distinguished human tactical thinking from galactic doctrines that emphasized technological dominance through superior firepower or enhanced physical capabilities. The difference wasn't about strength but perspective, how one views the battlefield and what constitutes advantage within it. The bridge-building premise that sounded so naive initially proved entirely accurate, just not in the diplomatic sense imagined. It became operationalized through shared security infrastructure development, where both human and galactic approaches contributed complementary strengths. The collaboration moved beyond symbolic exchange into functional integration of threat assessment methodologies that leveraged diverse perceptual frameworks. This practical cooperation achieved what formal diplomacy often struggles to accomplish: genuine understanding through shared operational experience. The galactic community's elitist culture wasn't prejudice in the conventional sense. It represented unexamined assumption about what constitutes capability, developed through generations of technological superiority. Their assessment criteria had evolved to measure physical enhancements and advanced weapon proficiency, while overlooking observational skills and environmental analysis capabilities. This blind spot wasn't intentional exclusion so much as institutional inertia that privileged certain abilities while ignoring others. The no-nonsense reception Kayla encountered reflected these outdated assessment parameters. The dismissive attitudes and initial skepticism weren't personal hostility, but institutional blindness to non-physical threat identification capabilities. The Academy's systems were calibrated to detect conventional military excellence while missing unconventional tactical thinking that operated through different observational priorities. This limitation in their evaluation frameworks eventually became their greatest opportunity for growth. You see, building bridges requires understanding both banks' foundational structures, the cultural assumptions and operational philosophies that shape each approach to security. Kayla's environmental mapping and infrastructure analysis accomplished exactly this deeper understanding. By examining the Academy's systems from both internal operational and external analytical perspectives, she identified points of convergence and potential integration between human and galactic methodologies. Research into security alliances consistently shows they strengthen through integrated assessment capabilities rather than standardized protocols. The combination of galactic technological sophistication with human adaptive thinking created more robust threat evaluation than either approach could achieve separately. This integration allowed addressing vulnerabilities that might be invisible within singular doctrinal frameworks, constrained by their own assumptions and blind spots. Her success demonstrated that effective security requires multiple perceptual frameworks operating simultaneously rather than seeking singular superior methodology. The combination of human environmental manipulation strategies with galactic technological capabilities produced comprehensive defense approach that could anticipate threats across different vectors and operational contexts. This diversity of perspective became strategic advantage rather than complication. The weaponized crucible of the Academy's training environment transformed into collaborative forge through incorporation of previously excluded cognitive methodologies. Where the facility had been designed to break down individuals to fit established protocols, it evolved to incorporate alternative approaches that enhanced its capabilities. This metamorphosis required acknowledging that security institutions must continuously adapt rather than relying on fixed doctrines. The cultural exchange that initially seemed failed diplomatic effort ultimately succeeded beyond diplomatic pretense into operational integration. The practical collaboration on security protocols and threat assessment methodologies achieved deeper understanding than any formal cultural exchange program could have facilitated. This operational integration created foundation for ongoing evolution, rather than static agreement, and then the real work began. The gradual implementation of integrated security protocols across galactic defense networks, the retraining of instructors in expanded assessment methodologies, and the ongoing refinement of approaches through continuous cross-cultural collaboration. This represented not conclusion but new beginning in galactic security evolution. Those seemingly ordinary human traits weren't ordinary at all. They represented evolutionary adaptation sharpened through millennia of being the physically vulnerable species on a dangerous planet. Without natural weapons or armor, humans developed cognitive methodologies that emphasized environmental manipulation over direct confrontation. This approach wasn't about superiority. It emerged from pure necessity, a survival mechanism for creatures who needed to outthink predators rather than overpower them. Systems thinking developed as tactical response to physical limitation. Where other species evolved claws or enhanced strength, humans cultivated observational precision and pattern recognition. Their survival depended on understanding environmental variables, predicting predator behavior, and identifying potential shelter or resources. This cognitive orientation created different threat assessment priorities focused on systemic vulnerabilities rather than individual combat capabilities. Adaptability wasn't conscious choice but biological imperative. The species that couldn't bench press vehicles needed to know which vehicle contained the command module's access codes. The group without natural camouflage required understanding of lighting patterns and shadow movements for concealment. What appeared as physical weakness concealed strategic advantage, observational priorities shaped by perpetual vulnerability. You see, research across terrestrial species consistently shows threat assessment capabilities correlate inversely with physical defense capabilities. The most physically vulnerable organisms develop the most sophisticated environmental awareness and predictive modeling skills. Humans represent the extreme end of this spectrum. Their lack of natural weapons forced development of exceptional cognitive tools for threat identification and avoidance. Her apparent humility during initial assessments wasn't weakness. It demonstrated operational discipline regarding capability concealment until strategic moments. The careful modulation of performance appearing just competent enough to remain in the program while revealing nothing of her actual analytical capabilities required precise understanding of evaluation parameters and instructor expectations. This calibrated underperformance represented sophisticated tactical choice. Those 3 pairs of underwear symbolized deeper tactical minimalism. The approach emphasized maximum effectiveness with minimum resource expenditure, carrying only what was essential, avoiding unnecessary attention, and maintaining mobility. This philosophy extended beyond equipment to cognitive approaches, focusing observation on critical systems rather than peripheral details, identifying leverage points rather than attempting comprehensive analysis. The resolution reframed human capabilities not as exceptional traits but as standard operating procedure refined through evolutionary pressure. What appeared as supernatural observation skills to galactic species represented normal human cognitive functioning, the result of generations developing these abilities for basic survival. The Academy wasn't seeing extraordinary human performance, but ordinary human methodology applied in extraordinary context. This evolutionary background explained the pattern recognition capabilities that so astonished the instructors. Humans didn't develop these skills for military application. They represented baseline survival tools that happened to have strategic value in security contexts. The same abilities that helped ancestors avoid predators now helped identify security vulnerabilities in advanced facilities. The observational superpower wasn't something humans needed to activate. It was their default state, the cognitive framework through which they processed all environmental information. This constant threat assessment and pattern recognition occurred automatically, without conscious effort, developed through evolutionary pressures that eliminated those who couldn't perceive danger quickly enough. But the Academy's evolution continued integrating these methodologies, recognizing that what made humans effective wasn't teachable technique, but inherent cognitive orientation. The institution began understanding that true security diversity required incorporating fundamentally different ways of processing environmental information, not just adding new technical skills to existing frameworks. Military academies do more than train warriors. They institutionalize cultural assumptions about conflict and resolution through their very architecture and procedures. The Galactic Defense Academy's brutal initiation rituals weren't acts of cruelty, but manifestations of galactic culture's fundamental philosophies about confrontation and strength. The simulated suffering, the public humiliation, the physical ordeal, these weren't arbitrary torments but expressions of deeply held beliefs about how true capability is forged and identified. Kayla's approach functioned as an institutional mirror, reflecting unexamined assumptions about intelligence, threat response, and what actually constitutes strategic thinking. Where the Academy measured strength through physical enhancement and technological integration, she demonstrated value in observational precision and systemic analysis. This contrast forced the institution to confront its own operational blind spots through direct comparison with alternative methodologies. The resulting transformation wasn't about her changing to fit their system, but about their system adapting to incorporate her capabilities. You see, even the most sophisticated assessment facility cannot effectively assess itself without external perceptual frameworks for comparison. The Academy's evaluation systems were designed to measure performance within established parameters, but lacked mechanisms for questioning those parameters themselves. Her presence created the necessary external perspective that allowed the institution to see its own limitations and assumptions clearly for the first time. Research into institutional evolution shows organizations grow through confrontation with operational realities their original design didn't anticipate. The Academy had been optimized for producing warriors who could operate within galactic defense doctrines, but it hadn't accounted for individuals who would question those doctrines' fundamental premises. This encounter with human tactical thinking revealed gaps in their conceptual framework that internal development couldn't have identified. Her transition from recruit to drill instructor wasn't hostile takeover. It represented the institution incorporating previously external capabilities into its operational self-concept. Where the Academy had focused on producing personnel who could execute protocols, it began cultivating individuals who could improve those protocols through critical analysis and alternative perspectives. This expansion of mission represented maturation rather than revolution. The comprehensive pedagogical rewrite that followed wasn't mere curriculum revision. It signaled maturation toward integrated threat response capabilities that combined galactic technological strength with human observational methodologies. The new training incorporated environmental analysis alongside combat drills, vulnerability identification alongside weapons training, and systemic thinking alongside tactical execution. This integrated approach created more comprehensive security framework. The resolution transformed the traditional teacher-student dynamic into obsolete hierarchy. It was replaced by symbiotic learning system, where instructors and recruits collaborated in continuous improvement of threat assessment methodologies. This shift acknowledged that security expertise isn't static knowledge but evolving practice that benefits from diverse perspectives and continuous critical examination. The transformation demonstrated that institutional growth requires incorporating external critique rather than defending against it. The Academy's willingness to learn from its own evaluation subject represented strategic adaptation rather than operational failure. This approach created more resilient security institution capable of continuous self-improvement through exposure to alternative perspectives and methodologies. And then the next recruit arrived, presenting different capabilities and perspectives that would further challenge and develop the Academy's evolving approach to threat assessment and security training. This continuous incorporation of diverse thinking ensured the institution wouldn't, again, become trapped within its own assumptions, but would maintain adaptive capabilities through ongoing external engagement. Day 5 wasn't an endpoint. It became the prototype for integrated galactic defense intelligence methodology, demonstrating that effective security required combining multiple cognitive frameworks rather than selecting a single superior approach. The Academy transformed from warrior production facility into living laboratory for threat assessment evolution, continuously testing and refining its methodologies through operational experience rather than theoretical models. The drills Kayla ran weren't human-centric, despite her involvement in their development. They represented hybrid protocols incorporating the distinctive cognitive strengths of multiple species. The pattern recognition capabilities humans developed through evolutionary vulnerability. The technological integration skills of cybernetically enhanced species. The environmental adaptability of crystalline lifeforms. This combination created more comprehensive training that leveraged diverse perceptual frameworks simultaneously rather than forcing standardization. The note-taking commanders observing. These new drills weren't students in the traditional sense. They functioned as co-architects of evolved assessment methodologies, documenting how different species responded to the integrated training approach. Their observations contributed to continuous refinement of protocols based on real-time performance data rather than predetermined doctrinal assumptions. This collaborative development process represented significant departure from top-down training methodologies. The orientation program Kayla designed didn't replace existing physical training. It expanded the curriculum to incorporate environmental analysis alongside combat readiness, recognizing that comprehensive security required both capability and perception. Recruits now learn to map infrastructure vulnerabilities while developing physical skills, understanding system interdependencies while mastering weapon systems. This integrated approach addressed previously neglected aspects of threat assessment. You see, becoming much more dangerous meant expanding the Academy's capabilities beyond its original design parameters. The institution evolved from measuring predetermined competencies to cultivating adaptive thinking that could address unforeseen challenges. This transformation required incorporating external perspectives that could identify limitations in established protocols and suggest improvements based on alternative tactical philosophies research. Into security systems consistently shows the most effective designs contain mechanisms for incorporating external critique into self-improvement. The Academy's evolution demonstrated this principle in action. Its willingness to learn from Kayla's unconventional approach allowed development of more robust threat assessment capabilities. This adaptive capacity became institutional strength rather than vulnerability. Her influence ensured the facility would never again mistake physical prowess for comprehensive threat response capability. The expanded evaluation criteria now included observational precision, systemic analysis, and adaptive thinking alongside traditional combat metrics. This broader definition of capability prevented overlooking individuals whose strengths lay in perception rather than performance. The final mood throughout the Academy wasn't triumph or celebration. It represented sober recognition of perpetual adaptation requirement in galactic security, the understanding that effective defense demands continuous evolution rather than fixed protocols. This realization transformed the institution's approach from maintaining established methods to continuously improving them through external engagement and internal critique. The story's ultimate resolution wasn't about Kayla's individual success. It demonstrated how institutions evolve when they confront their own limitations through external perspectives. The Academy's transformation showed that growth requires humility to recognize operational blind spots and flexibility to incorporate alternative methodologies that address those limitations. But the implications reverberated across galactic security systems, suggesting broader shifts in how defense institutions approached threat assessment and personnel development. The integration of human tactical thinking with galactic technological capabilities created prototype for more comprehensive security framework that could anticipate diverse challenges through perceptual diversity rather than doctrinal purity. This evolutionary step acknowledged that security strengthens through continuous adaptation rather than fixed protocols. The most persistent threats emerge not from outside opposition, but from unexamined assumptions within the system itself. Kayla's journey revealed that true strength lies not in overcoming challenges, but in understanding why they were structured that specific way. The Academy's evolution demonstrates that security requires perpetual self-questioning rather than blind adherence to established protocols. Progress often demands mapping the full depth of divisions before attempting to span them, recognizing that some gaps contain critical information about the terrain you're trying to connect.